Creating from the Heart, the Artistry of Living. I'm Suzy Vance, and I'm here with Andy Hynek.
Hi there, how are you?
So Andy, what's the new spot?
The new spot is the Chief of Detectives for the LaPorte County Sheriff's Office. So I oversee all the investigations that come through the Sheriff's Department, no matter how small or how big they are.
Just give me the smallest and the largest.
Small end would be credit card frauds, some petty thefts.
And I remember when you came to us and showed us how we make fake money.
Yep, that's right. And then all the way up to murders. We would investigate. Knock on wood, we haven't had any of those this year. That's good.
Oh, that's good. That's really great.
Yeah, very important.
This is the end of April.
Yeah.
Wow.
We've made it past the first quarter with which is good. Typically within our area, the Sheriff's Department, we don't have, we could go all year, hopefully, without a homicide. I think we average probably
So what's the
1 and
difference
2
between the sheriff's homicides and the Michigan City?
Good question. So we investigate any crimes that happen in the rural parts of the county. So not within the confines of the city of Michigan City, the city of LaPorte, or the towns of like Westville, Kingsford Heights, Potawatomi Park. They have their own law enforcement. Now we supplement them. So if they have a major crime in one of those small towns, we would come and assist them, sometimes take over as the lead agency. We also assist with Michigan City. So we will have, if Michigan City has a major case that they need help with, a lot of times is like crime scene processing, because that's a pretty specific skill set. And so I have 2 detectives that they're crime scene, so they would do all your CSI stuff. And so if Michigan City had theirs wasn't available, or the LaPorte City, their crime scene person was available, I would send one of our guys. Again, or for a larger scale investigation, we would help them, with anything they need. But so I kind of facilitate every report that comes into the Sheriff's Department, no matter whether it goes through the detective or not, gets assigned. I get it, and then I assign it out. So if a deputy takes a report where somebody hits a deer with their car, I ultimately get the report, and then on something like that, I would close. If there is somebody has fraud done on their bank account, I get that, and I farm it out to one of my investigators that does fraud crimes.
Okay, but mostly where you are is, I'll call it this, in the boondocks?
Yes. Yep.
So when somebody murders somebody and dumps them in a forest someplace?
That's what we would investigate. And so we have, the jurisdictional lines are pretty weird in LaPorte County. So, for instance, Woodland Crossings Apartments and that whole intersection of Woodland and 20, that is actually in the county. Tillish Appliance sits in the county.
Really?
Which is very weird. Yeah. And then like St. Anthony's Hospital or Franciscan Hospital, that is technically in the county, everything on the south side of 400. So we have some, more populated areas, but for the most part, the boondocks.
That's amazing. Yeah. So how did you get into this?
Well, so
did you think you'd be doing this when you were a kid?
When I was really, really little, I wanted to be an airline pilot. and then somewhere close to middle school, maybe a little bit before that, I started to have, some interest in law enforcement. And
what piqued your interest?
That's a good question. I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that. I had.
You like the uniform?
Yeah, I had some interest, and then in high school, what really got my interest going is I worked half day and went to school half day. The half day that I worked,
how did that happen?
Through a cooperative program. I went to New Prairie, and so in the 90s, we had this program, and I worked at Family Express at the gas station, and all the police officers would come in. So I had befriended one.
All the guys in uniform.
Yeah, and I thought, man, these are some really cool guys. And one of them, Roger Bernard, who has since passed away, was one of them that would come in, and I would do ride-alongs with
I
him.
was just going to say,
Yep.
he said, come on,
Yep.
get in the car.
Yep. So I did some ride-alongs, and he ended up, after I came out of the Army, I got hired by the Sheriff's Department. He was one of my first supervisors, and
You went from high school into the Army?
into the Army, yep.
And then...
to the Sheriff's Department, yep. And so I did...
Wait a minute. We missed a chapter here, because I remember listening to you talk once, and you said one of the most important things, I think, was to travel.
I travel a lot, yep. So I still do that. So,
and you started out saying to at least the high school kids I was with, is if you don't do anything else, do it early.
I tell them, I'm grateful for my military service. I absolutely am. And I served during peacetime, U.S. Army. I was a construction equipment operator. So I served during peacetime, thankfully. I served, I didn't know any like big war heroes, and I don't have any big war stories. I only served stateside. I never was deployed anywhere. Unlike a lot of my friends, it was just the way that I guess it worked out. I went to work in the military. When I did my work days in the military, it was just like a regular job. I operated equipment and I went home. But I tell people, if you don't do the military, because that was a really good opportunity, I tell people I would highly recommend taking a year or two in there and just traveling.
Between high school and whatever's next.
And you can do it very cheap. Travel I'm very passionate about, and I have this talk at least once a day with somebody, and I tell them that the United States, we don't value travel like they do in most other countries. And so when we think of traveling someplace,
we don't value difference.
Right, correct. And one of the benefits to traveling is learning other people's perspectives and why they feel that way, right? And so I really think if you are young and you can do that, because ultimately you're going to be our future leader. And I think a good quality of a leader is understanding other people's perspectives. You don't always have to agree with them, but simply understanding why they feel that way, or why they live that way, or why this is very important to them. Yeah. And even in our own country, even if you don't travel outside the United States, travel in our own country, we have lawmakers that are making laws and, maybe belittling the lawmaker from the other side of the country, and it goes back and forth because they simply have never been to each other's, area, to understand why they feel that way. But, I've travel I'm very passionate about, and like I said, when you leave the United States, you can do it very cheap. For example, I leave 2 weeks from tomorrow for South America for 2 weeks.
Where?
I'm going to eventually, or part of it is Machu Picchu. I'm going to Lima, Peru, and Cusco. But I'm staying in a hostel for $9 a night. I mean, you can't, where else could you do that at? And, the airfare is a little bit, expensive now, but
$9 a night.
$9 a night. And, even so, and it's been that way everywhere I've gone. I went to China in 2019 and I backpacked when I travel, I take everything I need on my back. One of the other stories that I tell people about traveling is that, myself included, we fall into this rut of we're going to go on vacation and we say, okay, we're going to Las Vegas for a week. And so I need an outfit for the daytime and an outfit for the nighttime, and I need a maybe outfit, right? And then you multiply that, and all of a sudden you're going for, like I said, a week or 5 days. You have this big suitcase. When everywhere else you go, you could take 2 or 3 shirts, 2 or 3 pairs of pants, and undergarment change. And nobody cares that they saw you wearing that shirt 2 days ago. They don't even pay attention to it.
And they won't even probably be around you in 2 days. It'll all be somebody new, and they don't even know.
And so, like I said, the hostels all have laundry facilities, so I'll travel. I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks, and I already have everything set aside. I have 3 t-shirts, 1 long sleeve shirt, 1 sweatshirt, and 3 pair of pants, and that's it. That's all I need. And I'll wash my clothes, every 3 days, and that's it. Because again, we put such an emphasis on, fashion and stuff, and people don't care what you wear.
Right.
So I'm going to be in Lima for about 5 days, just bumming around. I plan to go to the beach a couple days at the hostel, and that's across the street from the beach. And I fly to Cusco, and then I go up the Inca Trail for 5 days. So I stay in a tent for those 4 nights to Machu Picchu, come down, and then I hike Rainbow Mountain, which is about 17,000 feet up. and then I come down, and then I go to Lake Titicaca for 2 days, and then Lima for a day, and back home. So,
Wow.
but I was always a person who thought, again, because it's kind of the American mentality of like, I don't care about these other countries. I don't need to go there. I'm fine here in the U.S. And the U.S. is beautiful. I've been to 40.
Right.
I've been to 44 of the 50 states. I'm an avid motorcyclist. I travel on a motorcycle a lot around the United States, but um, I ended up with a bunch of airline miles, and I said, well, I want to cash these in. And this is how it all started. So I said, but I could pay to go to Florida on an airline. If I'm going to have these miles, I might as well get the most bang for my buck, and I need to find some place different to go. So I started doing this research with a travel company, like we travel solo, and I was like, man, here's a trip to the Alps, Mont Blanc. It sits in the middle of Italy, Switzerland, and France. I said, I've never met anybody that's been to the Alps. I'm going to the Alps.
There you go.
So that's what I did. And
that was the first one.
That was the first one, and then a travel bug outside the United States. Oh, I older. I was in 2015, and I had been to so I used to go every year with a group from Michigan City on a trip to an all-inclusive in Mexico. But when you go to Playa and Cancun, right, you're really not. It's the United States in a warm climate. It's not really,
Right.
So that was my first really travel abroad, I guess, and I was in my late 30s, and that's why I say I wish I would have done this, when I do this. So when I go next week, at my age, most of the people that will be around me are much younger, they're just out free spirited, learning the world, and they're in Lima today, and they'll be in Argentina the next day, and then they're going to catch a plane and they'll be in Thailand next week. But I did that, and then I did Mount Everest up to Camp 1.
Ooh.
I did true summit of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa,
wow,
which is the highest freestanding mountain in the world. And then I backpacked. Then I said, well, I want to do something a little different than that. And let me, instead of going up a mountain, I backpacked Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, which was absolutely beautiful. And then I did China in 2019. I started in Beijing and ended in Hong Kong for 3 weeks. And again, just with a backpack. And, I even like with China, obviously they're pretty restrictive, but like to eat there, a meal, dinner and 2 beers was like $8 or $9. And this is unbelievable. There's nowhere in America you could do that at,
right.
But so I tell people.
So how did you do it the first time? How did you figure out where you were going and what you were doing?
Good question. I booked with a company that promotes they call it solo traveling. So
how'd you find them?
A girl that I graduated high school with, grew up with, she lived down the road from me. She had done some solo travel when she was about 20 with this company. G Adventures is their name. And so I reached out to her and said, look, I want to go on this trip, but again, most places in America don't give a lot of vacation time. I'm grateful that I do get a lot of vacation time, but most of my friends don't. The ones that maybe do have time off, then they couldn't afford it or whatever. Right. So I said, I'll do it by myself. So I reached out to her. And I found this company, and I knew that I had to be in Chamonix, France is where I started at. So I just kind of, I booked with these air miles, and I flew to Switzerland, and then I found a bus company to take me across the border. And
very adventurous.
Yeah. And
you waited when you took the airplane and you landed, you waited till you landed till you figured out how to get to the next place?
Yeah, a little bit. And which is kind of out of my norm. I like to have things like pre-planned out. Yeah. And so, but I learned that it's just better to be a little more kind of go with the flow when you get there. And so far that's worked. A crazy story I tell people, I went to Africa. I flew to Kenya and I booked a safari, and I went by myself. And that was fun, but it was for 4 days and it was just me and a guide. And I would have rather had somebody else with me because there's like nobody else to like talk to. And the animals, you see them, thousands of them. I mean, it's like driving around the country here, you know. So what I saw in 4 days, I really could have saw in one day. But afterwards, I go back to the hotel and then I needed to get to Tanzania, another country in Africa, for Mount Kilimanjaro.
Right.
And most people fly from Kenya to Tanzania. And I said, well, I want to get the full experience. So I booked a bus thinking like I was going to get on a United limo. And it was not a United limo.
No.
It was like a school bus with all of our stuff on the roof. And I was the only non-local, which was interesting. And then once we crossed the border, we got stopped in the middle of the desert by these militants that were shaking down the bus driver because they didn't think he paid enough taxes for taking computer equipment from one country to another. They had an office in both. And it got a little nerve wracking just because I didn't speak their language. I didn't know what was going on. These guys had guns. We're in the middle of the desert. I have no idea where I am. I don't look like anybody else. And I thought, oh man.
And you're tall.
Yeah. Yeah, I stuck out. But other than that, I've not had any issues. I just kind of, like, so for instance, I know that when I get to the airport in Lima in 2 weeks, that I'll find an Uber. They have Uber there, and get to my hostel. And then for the first 4 or 5 days, I have absolutely nothing planned, just to kind of float around. Yeah. And I communicate solely by Wi-Fi when I'm there. Even back to my kids back here, I'll FaceTime them or whatever. But in China, because of the time difference, like I would go to a 7-Eleven and go in the corner of the store and use their free Wi-Fi to FaceTime my kids back home. So it's.
So do you think this makes a difference in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I say that because I really feel that it gives me the ability to sometimes, for first responders, I've done this 23 years. It's very easy to get jaded with society, and because you see so much negative and just horrible stuff. And sometimes you say, I don't understand why this person's doing this, because in my personal life, I don't live that way. But traveling and understanding other people's perspectives maybe opens my eyes, went to that stuff, and say, well, I know I don't live this way, but
what's making that person live that way?
Why is it? Like, what's going on in their life? What's their background? I ran the drug unit for a long time and for several years, and I used to, on a very regular basis, I talk with these individuals that we would come in encounter with, because it just wasn't a way of life that I knew prior to law enforcement. I've never lived it. But to sit and talk to them and just, how did you get to this point in your life? Like, what set that in motion? Why do you do what you do? Why do you steal? Well, we steal because we're trying to
feed a
habit. Yep. And to understand, that all of that, I tell people the one thing I've learned in 23 years of law enforcement is that everybody's got a story to tell. No matter who it is, everybody has a story to tell. They got there, they got to that position for some reason or reasons. And ultimately, everybody's got somebody that cares about them, even whether it's an addict or somebody that's been convicted of murder or stealing or anything in between. At the end of the day, there's somebody that cares about these people. And, they were all little children at some point. Nobody grows up saying, I want to be a junkie, or I want to be a thief, or I want to be a murderer. But something in that lifetime, somewhere in there in those formidable years, usually something happened. Yeah.
Right.
So, but I've learned in traveling kind of helps me open my eyes and understand that. And even, I promote it to my kids doing, I take them camping every summer. We go to, we try to hit different states, and we only camp in state parks. And we've gone over from Maine to Minnesota.
What states have you missed?
Personally, I have not been to Washington, Oregon.
Washington, the state of.
Yep.
Oregon
and Idaho. Hawaii, Alaska, and Utah. So all on my short list. Actually, I'm taking my daughter to Seattle in sometime this fall. That's where she picked to go. So it benefits both of us. So I'll hit Washington, and my plan is to hit Hawaii on my 50th, since it's a 50th state. So.
Do you, what's the longest period of time you can take off from work?
Well, we don't necessarily have a rule that says you can't. It depends on what position you're in, but we don't have a rule that says you can't take all of your time together.
Mhm.
So I currently have 30 vacation days and 16 holidays. So I could take, in theory, all 46 days off at a time if
Well,
I
I have a
wanted.
suggestion for you.
Yes.
You should get in a car with your kids and you should drive west on Route 2 till you get to Glacier National Park. And then you should drive north until you get to the border of Yukon and Alaska. And then you should go into Alaska. You should go down and see Haines. You should go to the Kenai Peninsula. Then you should go back up to Anchorage, and then you should take the Alaskan Marine Highway back down to Washington. And you could do that. You could probably do that in a car, including driving home.
Yeah.
Probably 3 to 4 weeks.
Interesting.
We did it in 5, but we
Yeah.
went to Yosemite.
Yeah.
It's just, it's eye-opening. It's just, there are signs along the road, no gas for 230 miles, gas up now. It's just, and it's, the terrain is just so different.
Yeah. Interesting. That does sound interesting.
And
I am a car guy. Like I love road trips. Yeah,
we're roadies.
Yeah, I'm a big road trip person.
Mhm.
I do a lot of road trips in cars, motorcycle. So I go to Sturgis every year on the motorcycle for the rally, and I've been fortunate to ride all over the United States. But I tell people the Black Hills is absolutely my favorite place to ride. It's so beautiful, the whole Black Hills area.
You have to go to Alaska.
Yeah, I have a friend that did that, and he says the exact same thing. It's beautiful.
It's unbelievable. It's so different, and it is so wide open. It's just so different.
Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely on my short list. Good. Alaska looks absolutely beautiful, but again, just doing that stuff like that just gives you a different perspective.
It does.
Listening to folks to see, like what that they live differently, and that they live different doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just different. It's different. Yeah, it's just different.
So, what's your favorite thing about your job these days? Do you have something?
I like the fact that I have a lot of the best part about my job, I would say, is I have a lot of freedom and ability to really, being a detective. So in the patrol division, which I've done 2 different times, once for 10 years, and then I came back as a commander for 3 years, you get instant gratification usually from helping somebody. Somebody in an immediate danger, you help them, or need for service, you help them. As a detective, it's usually a more complicated, sometimes who done it, sometimes we got to prove who did it, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of being able to solve those crimes and help those people that have been usually victims of something more major than a lower level crime, whether it's the relatives of a somebody that gets murdered, or children that have been victims of sexual misconduct or whatever. I get a lot of satisfaction out of that, and I have the ability now where I work the street sometimes as with overtime, or for shift coverage. So I'll sign up and voluntarily go in and work the road, so I can still mix it up with those guys and do that stuff. But I wouldn't do anything else. I absolutely love it. I was fortunate to start very young. I started at 21 years old.
So I get that you would tell somebody who's graduating from high school, or maybe in their 30s and they're stuck, that they should go travel.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think the other thing is I tell people, I grew up east side of the county, very small, school, small area. Right. Grew up with the same people around me all the time. Grew up mom and dad and 2 sisters, like a beaver cleaver family, so to speak. And so my best friend and I enlisted in the Army together. And at 18 years old, when you are that age, you think you know everything.
Everything.
And you think that however it is you grew up is how everybody lives. And
Or should.
And I remember joining the military. That was the first and most important lesson I learned. I learned it almost immediately, when I shipped off. And after all the years that I was in, that was the most important lesson because, we were meeting people that were, gang members from Mississippi and, people that came from broken homes from the West Coast. And we didn't grow up that way. And I thought, wait a minute, like this person, they kind of look like me and they're the same age as me, but man, they've experienced stuff that I couldn't even, like we saw movies or something, and but that's I really think the benefit with travel is you kind of learn who you are and what you want. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
and it's so easy for us to say, well, I'm 18 and my parents really want me to do this.
To go to
or
college.
Grandma and Grandpa really want me to do this, or Aunt and Uncle really want me to do this, as opposed to just kind of going out and
doing your thing.
And saying,
who am I?
Yeah, who am I? And I was passing through this town in Montana and it was beautiful. I think I'm going to move here, as opposed to saying, well, I got to stay here because this is where everybody in my several generations live. So it's just so, it's very eye-opening and
take a chance.
Yeah. And especially the reason I tell people, especially younger, to do it is, for the most part, you still have, most people at that age are still going to have their families. So if you fall back and fail, you can always fall back on home. If you get to a point and you're like, man, I'm out of money.
The other thing is if you wait until you get married and have kids and do all that, the chances of you taking a risk in the first place and in the second place spending the money and doing all that stuff, you've got so much more on your plate. You just don't.
You're exactly right. And you have just life gets in the way.
Right.
And, so you can always, and the other thing is, when you're that age, and what I see a lot of people do is, you're 19, 20 years old, whatever, and say, well, I'm getting low on money. I'm going to work at this restaurant for a month and I'll live here for a month or so and save up enough money to go to the next place and I'll work there for a month, and it's really, especially if you pick up something in the service industry, that's very easy to do. Most of the hostels I stay in are ran. They have like a manager, but the workers that are like at the front desk are people that are staying there. But they say, "Well, I'll work 8 hours this week, and that pays
right, and I'll take a free room or something."
Exactly right. So it, and I've always found that those people then are the people that, like, when I go these places, that's who I hang out with. And somebody there will want to do what you want to do today, or give you a tip. And then tomorrow it's a different person. You say, oh, today I think I'm going to go to the beach. Anybody want to go to the beach? Somebody says, well, no, but last week I went and I recommend you go here, and
that's great.
Yeah. So that's my plan.
That's a good plan.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Suzy Vance, Creating from the Heart, The Artistry of Living with Andy Hynek. See you next time.
Bye.